Texas with my son. We was there for 5 months, and then I ended up back in Rochester. And I came back to Rochester, and I had a new job in Rochester, and I felt like, okay, I had direction as to where I was going and what was going on in my life for me and my son. Definitely didn't have it all together, but I felt confident in the small steps that I was taking at the time for our progression. Even while I was out of town, his dad knew, when we left, and it was a lot of different things that transpired between then, and we got into a lot of different arguments, and it was just a lot of drama, honestly. And I knew that even as co-parents, that's just not the life that I wanted for myself or for my child. Like, I just did not want to live a life of drama and arguments and bitterness. I didn't want to do that. So once I came back, I felt more in control, in the sense of not trying to control him, not using my child to control him, but just more in control of my life. As far as I realized, I was able to accept that I was broken and I needed to give myself time to heal. I needed to learn how to be kind to myself. I needed to learn how to show myself grace. I needed to learn new cycles and new mindsets and new patterns. And I knew that it was going to be a process, but I was up for the work. Like, I knew that I was going to do whatever I had to do to be the best version of myself for myself and for my son. And so I'm back in Rochester, working, being a mom, picking up the pieces and trying to figure out where pieces go in my life. And then I found out that my son's father was expecting a baby. And at this time, my son was like about 3 years old. He was about 3 years old. And that was really, really hurtful for me, because for me, it was hurtful because it just didn't make sense. And it didn't feel fair. It didn't feel fair for my son. Like, I had gotten to a place in my life where I felt like I was over and okay with the hurt that I experienced from him. But the hurt that my son would experience, it was different. I just didn't want my son to go through the abandonment issues that I had growing up. And so I was hurt when I found out that my son's father was having another baby. It just didn't make sense to me that he could have another baby and bring new life into the world and not take care of the life that he already had. I know it would have been a big trigger for me, but myself, I was in a place where I was also expecting a baby. And so just like when I was pregnant with my son, I couldn't put too much of my energy into how I felt about him having a baby on the way, because I had a baby I was taking care of and I had a new baby on the way, and that's what needed my focus. And so that brings me to, again, more hurt by Black men. I've said it before, my children, they both have two different dads. I've experienced hurt from them both. So fast forward, now I'm pregnant with my daughter, and I'm hurt because my son's father has a baby on the way, but I'm even more hurt because here I am pregnant with my daughter, and her dad did the same thing to me that my son's father did. He abandoned me once I got pregnant. And he also was someone who I loved very deeply and saw a future with. For him, when he hurt me, when he abandoned me, once I got pregnant with my daughter, what he did hurt more. It hurt more than what my son's father did, because he knew what I experienced with my son's father. He knew, we talked about it. He was there for some of it towards the end. He knew, and he did the same exact thing. He knew how I felt. He knew what I went through, and he turned around and did the same thing. And so with my daughter's father, it was just more hurtful. We officially met when I was about 19 years old. And like, before I even met him physically, he would tell my older sister that I was gonna be his baby mom. And I can be honest and say, and I can laugh about it now, I was like, this was before I even had my son, I was flattered. Like, he want me to be his baby mom? Like, okay. Okay, he want me to be his baby mama. that was the norm. I thought that that was the norm. So I was flattered by that. Even though I wasn't in a mindset where I was thinking about having children, to me it was like, okay, it's something here. He want me to be his baby mom, not his wife. He wanted me to be his baby mom. And so again, we officially met when I was 19 years old, and we had what I would call on and off again encounters. I can't say that we were ever in a relationship, but we had on and off again encounters. And again, I was used to that. It wasn't a red flag to me during the time, because that was the foundation that I had with my dad. I was used to on and off again, on and off again. You hear sometimes and you not sometimes, and it was okay. When you come back around, maybe you got a reason why you was absent, maybe you don't got a reason, and we'll just pick up back like nothing happened. And so me and my daughter's father, we had those type of on and off again experiences with each other, I would say for about 6 or 7 years before I actually was pregnant with my daughter. After all of the drama with my son's father, my daughter's father would say to me that the only way me and him would be together was if I got pregnant, if I had his baby. And so honestly, my son, again, he's like 3. I have went through a traumatic experiences with his dad. I really wasn't in a place where I was ready to have another child. And I don't want to say, no, I was a great mom. I've always been a great mom, because the love that I have for my children, I did the best that I could with what I knew. And as I knew better, I did better. And so, I didn't so much completely question my mother's skills, but I just knew that I wasn't ready to be responsible for another life, because I saw the reality of what being responsible for a life was. I just wasn't ready for that. But again, I loved him, and so I kept my distance for a while. I kept my distance from him. We would talk sometimes, but again, it was normal for us to not communicate, so it wasn't a big deal. And some months passed after I had relocated back from Texas to Rochester. Some months had passed, and then one night of temptation and me giving in led to me being pregnant. And in my mind, at this time, I'm like 25, 26 years old. I was 26 when I had my daughter. So in my mind, when I got pregnant with my daughter, I thought, well, we're going to be together, because that's what he told me, so that's what it's going to be. I believed him. I trusted him. I trusted his word, and I believed that we were going to be together. And when I found out that I was pregnant and I told him that I was pregnant, he did the same thing. He left me. And I don't want to say he left me, because we weren't even together, but he abandoned me. He didn't step up. And from my experience of what I knew, he also had other children. I had never met his children, but from what I knew about him, he was a family man. He cared greatly for his family. He cared greatly for his daughters that he already had. Not only did I love him, I believed that he loved me as well. And I just didn't believe that he would be able to do me that way, but he did. And I went through my pregnancy with my daughter by myself, in a sense of the other half who took part in creating her was not there to support me. And with my daughter, it was different. So like with my son, I was just so overjoyed with becoming a new mom that I still found joy throughout my pregnancy. But with my daughter, that dark place that I had experienced when I left and took my son to Texas, I was back in that place. I was so embarrassed and I was so ashamed, and it was because I couldn't believe it was happening to me for a second time. And then it was who he was to me. I couldn't believe that it was happening to me, because there were things that he did for me with my son. My son wasn't his child. I can call him and he would help me. If I called and asked for money, that's what he would do. He would send me money. He would do different things. And so I just didn't believe that that was happening to me and that he was doing that when I became pregnant with our daughter. The first 4 months of my pregnancy were dark. They were dark. I was so embarrassed. I was so depressed. I was so ashamed. Within the first couple of weeks of knowing that I was pregnant with my daughter, I had a period of time where I began to bleed. And so, I know that bleeding in the early signs of pregnancy could be a miscarriage. And I remember making an appointment and going to the doctors and sitting outside in the car and praying to God to please allow me to have a miscarriage. I didn't want to get an abortion because I already had one. And the effects that having an abortion had on me was it was really hard emotionally. That was one of the things that I'll talk about at a later time, but it took me years to forgive myself for having an abortion. Even when I knew God had forgiven me for doing it, it took me a really, really long time for to forgive myself. Even after my daughter, it took me a really long time to forgive myself for having an abortion. And so, as much as I wanted to get an abortion with my daughter, I just couldn't do it again. And so when I was bleeding early in my pregnancy, I remember sitting outside the doctor's appointment saying, God, please just take the baby away from me. Like, I don't want to do this again. And I remember just being so broken and in tears. And I still have the little ultrasound. And she was just a little tiny nugget. I didn't know what she was, but I was fine. And it was like, everything looks fine. Your levels are normal. And it's normal sometimes to bleed in the beginning of pregnancy. It's not always a cause for alarm. And I was just so sad after that. Like, I was just, for months, I was just so sad because I did not want this baby. I did not want to do this again. Like, that joy that I felt carrying my son, I didn't feel that with her. I didn't feel that in the beginning. I was probably about 4.5 months right before it was that time to find out whether I was having a girl or a boy. I remember sitting in the bathroom with the door locked and just being in tears, feeling like I just can't do this. And I remember an overwhelming feeling and presence, and God just let me know that I just had to trust him. I just had to trust that he was going to turn ashes into beauty. And I just had to trust. And it was in that moment where I had to make a decision that I was going to finish out my pregnancy with the same type of spirit and joy that I had with my son. Again, it was before I found out that I was having a girl, but before I ever even had children, I always wanted a daughter. I always wanted a little me. I always wanted to have a little version of myself. And so I made the decision that I was going to finish out my pregnancy and knowing that I'm getting another opportunity to bring life into the world. And so, like, a couple weeks, about 2 weeks after that place, I had finally got a peace about the fact that I was having this baby. And shortly after that, I found out that I was having a girl. I always say that God knows exactly what you need, because I already had my son and God knew I needed a little daughter. I could say she's my junior. I'm Jocelyn Elizabeth and she's Corey Elizabeth. Corey Elizabeth was born November 11th on 11/11, and that in itself is symbolic. That date is a symbolic date. And I just was overwhelmed once again with joy, with being able to bring life into the world and to know that God trusted me with this precious life. Despite how hurt I was, how broken I was, how abandoned I felt, I knew that God loved me enough to give me the ability to bring life into the world. And to this day, it's just been an amazing experience. At the right time, in the right way, I will definitely share my story with her and explain to her how I prayed for a miscarriage. But to this day, I always say I am so thankful to God for the prayers he do not answer. Because if he answered all of our prayers, my baby wouldn't be here. And to know her is to love her. She is infectious. Her energy is one of a kind. And it's just a blessing to be able to love and support and guide her on her own journey. But I tell all of that because, again, at the hands of Black men, I experienced a lot of traumatic pain, just like with me, with the story I told about my dad and him denying me. I went through the same thing with my daughter, with her dad. Hearing people say that he was saying he's not sure if that's his baby or it's not his baby. And that was so humiliating because it was an attack on my character. When I got pregnant with my daughter, I was in a place in my life where I was being intentional in my healing and doing my best to make the right decisions. And so to have sex one time and to get pregnant and then to be accused or to say like there's a doubt of if she belonged to who she belonged to, it was heartbreaking, it was humiliating. And to bring life into the world and to have some of those joyous moments taken away with those harsh realities of abandonment, those harsh realities of not knowing what the future holds, not for me but for my children, not knowing if their dads would ever come around, not knowing if they'll ever have the bond that I desire. It was tough. With my daughter's father, the same thing. I mean, life has a way of repeating itself until you learn lessons. And that's when I learned that. It's like, no, I'm going to learn the lessons I need to learn because I don't want to keep going through the same traumatic situations. But just like with my son's father, it was the same with my daughter's father. He too, at some point I found out, had another baby after my daughter. And that was hurtful. After my daughter was born, the first time that he saw her, she was 4 months old. She was beautiful, like she was a beautiful chocolate doll. And in my mind, I just knew that once he saw her, I just knew there was no way he would stay away from something so beautiful because he created it. There's just no way. She was 4 months and he saw her for the first time. And then they didn't see each other again until she was 1.5 years old. Me and my mom had moved to North Carolina and we were living together. My son was 5 and my daughter was 1 when we moved to North Carolina. We moved to North Carolina June of 2017. I took my kids to Rochester on break for spring break back in 2018, and that was when my daughter got the chance to meet her father, which I would say technically for the first time because in her life that's what she would be able to remember. And then this time when she was 1.5 years old and they were seeing each other, it was with him being incarcerated. And so that's a different pain in itself to know that, okay, now you're here, but it's not free. It's not in the way that my daughter deserves for you to be here. And that is painful. And during that time, at this point, she's 1.5, full of personality at 1.5 years old, full of a lot of charisma and a lot of personality. And she is seeing her dad behind bars for the first time, and it was painful. And then in the midst of all of that is when I found out he had another child after her, and it was painful because again, it's like, here she is 1.5 years old, you haven't been present, and then you had another baby. Like how can you bring life into the world and not take care of the life that's already here? And it's just that those experiences hurt me a lot, you know. After I found out that my daughter's father had another baby on the way, when I came back home to North Carolina, I was depressed for months. I was in a dark place. I was functioning, I was a high functioning depression. That's what I was operating under. I was able to work and, you know, provide for my children, but I was not able to give my children what they really deserved from me because I was just so hurt and so broken. I think finding out that information was again just that trigger to my childhood, that trigger to what I experienced with my son's father, and that reality of realizing like, here we go again. I'm going through the same stuff over again. And honestly, it hurts worse. It hurts deeper the second time because it's one thing to go through something once, but to continue to go through it again and with different people, it's just different. And it hurt real bad. I was depressed for a period of time after finding that out, and I had to, you know, do my healing work. I had to go through and uncover what it was and what was being triggered, and why I was having these feelings and what I did to put myself in these situations and take accountability for my own actions as well, and understand my actions, understand how I got to this place. How did I get to a place to allow people, to allow men, to allow black men, to allow black men that I love to treat me this way?